Now it's time to talk about Cindy. I feel like that's crooked. Like it needs to be turned this way a little bit.
No, you're pretty
Is it okay?
square.
All right. I was actually pregnant with Cindy before we left for Bakersfield. And I don't know whether I got pregnant right before or right after I discovered that I had a problem, and I had a tumor about this size that was a ligumous tumor in my groin. And so I often wondered years later if it was possible that I was pregnant before I had the surgery. So later I talked to the doctor that did the surgery, a Dr. Tingy, and he said there's no way that could have caused Cindy's later problems. But I remember we went up to Bear Lake with the study group, and I was laying on the beach, and I had on my little red plaid swimming suit, and I thought, oh, by this time next year, we may not be living here in Utah. And I remember really feeling...
You mean in California?
Well, we were at Bear Lake, and I was laying on the beach,
Okay.
and I thought, by this time next year, we may not be living in Utah.
Okay.
We may be living in California. I wonder if they know I'm pregnant. I wonder if anybody has guessed yet that I'm pregnant. But we left Utah in August of that year. That was 1958. And went to California. And we lived on Lake Street. And I may have already said some of this before, not having notes. I don't know. But we lived on, first of all, we lived on Lake Street, and then right before Cindy was born, we decided to buy a house and put money down on a house. And I went into labor on New Year's Eve with her and went to the hospital, but she just didn't come and didn't come and didn't come. And they dripped the pits in my arm, and that was for the pits. And I still didn't come, and there was a lady there that knew one of our friends, and she was swearing at her husband and so vile-mouthed. I was just shocked. But we thought we might have a New Year's Eve baby, but nothing happened. I didn't progress. So I went home and I waited for 12 days, and then my water broke in the middle of the night. And I remember her birth so distinctively because the Bakersfield hospital was so busy that they had me out in a hall, and I was in hard labor. And the nurse would come by every 5 minutes and check, and the last time she came by, why, she says, oh, we better get her into the delivery because that baby is coming. And the only thing I had to help with the pain is on my wrist they had strapped a thing with some gas in it. So every time I'd have a pain, why, I was supposed to, breathe it in. But I just barely got into the delivery room when Cindy was born. Now, Cindy was such an easy baby. She was so good-natured and so easy. Just a lot easier nursing, and I was able to nurse. Lucille Irish had told me while I was pregnant that I should take yeast pills, and it'd make me better at nursing, and I did. And I was able to nurse Cindy till she was 9 months old with no problem at all. Whereas with both Patty and Leanne, why, my nursing skills at 3 months was practically over with. And so Cindy was just a real easy child to raise. I was working in the primary down there in Bakersfield, and one night I had to go to a primary meeting, and I left Burton to take care of the girls, and he forgot that he had, I guess, bathed the girls and forgot that he'd left the water in the bathtub. And then he heard a go and went in and found Cindy had gotten back into the bathtub and almost drowned. I mean, she wasn't blue or anything, but that was really scary. I really was kind of afraid to leave Burton alone with the kids after that. When Cindy was just a year and a half old, we decided to move back to Utah, and so Burton drove one car and I drove the other car, and I had the two older girls with me, and Burton had Cindy, and we got separated, and that's another long old story, but it took many, many hours for us to get communications and get together in Bakersfield. No, in Las Vegas at my cousin Audrey's.
Oh, for the love of a cell phone.
Oh, yes, and they didn't have cell phones then. And Burton had promised to wait at a certain place for me in Mojave, and I went there and waited hours and hours, and he didn't show up. And then I went to Audrey's and waited, and he didn't show up and didn't call, and I thought he had probably gone on to Utah, but he finally showed back up at Audrey's. I guess he had gone to the side of the road and slept for a while. But anyway, on that trip, I was driving our little Volvo, and he was driving the car that we had traded our Morris Minor to Verla White for her second car. And as I reached Glendale, why, I threw a rod through the motor. Terrible, terrible. And we had to go back to Bakersfield and leave it and try to pile our things in the other car and leave what we could there in Las Vegas in the Volvo. And then we went to Nancy's and we celebrated Leanne's 5th birthday there. And then we moved to Taylorsville and lived there for about, year and a half until we built our house. Cindy was a good student, and she liked school. And let's see, Ginger, our little dachshund dog, was given to us by the Richards, Vivian Richards. And when Cindy was in the 2nd grade, why, Ginger went into heat, and we put her down in a room in the basement and tried to keep the doors closed, but some dog found his way and impregnated her. And Ginger had little puppies, and Cindy's 2nd grade teacher, Mrs. Anderson, kindly took one of them. I can't even remember what happened to the others, who we gave them to. But we had the dog Ginger and really enjoyed her and had her fixed after she had that batch of puppies so that she couldn't have any more. When Bart had his accident, why, Mrs. Fuller, Cindy's teacher, noticed that Cindy was really not doing well. And she called me one day and told me that she thought that Cindy was blaming herself because she had been playing a game with Bart in the camper, and the camper was an old one, and it was really kind of a rough drive. And so they would stand and put their hand out and their feet out and say, "Ah," with the bumps that would come. And she and Bart had been doing that, and she got tired of it, and so she went up on the bed, and Bart stayed down below. And Mrs. Fuller felt that maybe Cindy blamed herself for Bart going back by the door. And so we talked to Cindy and told her that, it was not her fault at all. It certainly wasn't. And she seemed to get better after that. But a year later, we invited Linda Beck, who was my cousin Leslie's daughter, to live with us. And it was when Cindy and Linda were in the 6th grade. And Linda lived with us for a year, and she and Cindy did not get along well. Linda had a lot of problems, and it was not a good year for Cindy that year. But Linda went to live with Leslie and his second wife, Diesta, after being with us for a year. And then Cindy went into junior high, and she met a friend that proved to be one of her really good friends. It was Debbie Shiner. And Debbie used to go on trips with us and many places with us, and they were just really good friends. But when the junior high divided into the high school, some of the kids went to Kearns High School, and that's where Debbie went. And then Cindy went over to Granger High School. And Cindy took Spanish in high school and really excelled at it. But in Cindy's senior year, along about Christmas time and the 1st of January, she started getting really bad headaches. So we took her to a neurologist, and he said, oh, it's just migraines, and told her to not eat fish or chocolate and see how she was. But it didn't help. And then in early February, she started really being a lot sicker, and we took her back, and he didn't know quite what to do. But when she started getting double vision and throwing up, we told him that something more needed to be checked out, that it wasn't just migraine headaches. And Cindy at the time was working at Deseret Book, and she just couldn't keep with school and working at Deseret Book and having these headaches and not being able to hold down food, having double vision. So Dr. Tingy sent her to see Dr. Rich, and we explained the history of Cindy, that she had been slow in developing physically as a woman, and that her aunt Lynette had died of a cancerous brain tumor. And so the doctor decided that she should have a CAT scan. And CAT scans were quite new. They were only 2 years old. Cindy Tew's initials in it. She thought that was kind of unique. But the doctor looked at her and sent her in for a CAT scan, and we went back. And I remember sitting there, and he had said, well, 99 and 9/10% chance she will be okay, that it won't be anything showing up on the CAT scan. But we sat there in the office, and he looked at this CAT scan and kind of drummed his fingers and looked at it again, and he said, well, I was wrong. You do have a tumor there. It's about the size of a plum. And he immediately set up surgery with Dr. Rich, and I guess it was the better part of a week before they could get in to do the surgery. And in the meantime, Patricia was expecting a baby, and the news sent her into labor, and she had her baby. And I think that I already...
Yeah.
Did you see what happened to the camera?
No,
Burton kicked the chair.
Oh.
I'm not sure it's focused anymore.
No, it's
Is it
fine.
okay?
You had mentioned what happened with Cindy when
I
we
talked
about Cindy.
About Cindy.
Yeah.
But that was so special to Cindy that they would name this baby after her. Okay. Cindy had the surgery, and they could take out some of the tumor, but they probably couldn't take out all of it. She was really brave through all of it. One of the interesting things that happened is that the seminary teacher came over later and told Cindy that the whole school had been fasting and praying for her, even those that weren't LDS. And before Cindy went into surgery, we knew that it was very risky and that her chances were not really great. But he keeps kicking it. But she had had a patriarchal blessing that promised her a longer life, and also, right at that time, she received a letter from Brigham Young University that gave her a dean's scholarship to go to the Y the next year. So she felt like she was going to live. She didn't have the doubts that had been planted in our minds. And so she was really brave going through it, and she did survive the surgery. And then a series of radiation treatments. How many radiation treatments and for how long was it, Burton? It was 5 weeks of radiation, 5 days a week. And they gave her the most radiation that they had ever given a human being. And it's interesting because they don't even use radiation on that type of brain tumor between the second and third ventricle anymore. They do the surgery if they can. But when they did Cindy's surgery, they tried to go in at the top and couldn't, so then they came around here and took, some bone out on the side of her head and got to it because it was in such a delicate area with blood vessels. They were just afraid that they wouldn't be able to do it, but they did as successfully as they could on the surgery. And she recovered pretty good, but they indicated that her life would be quite restricted. She could never ride a bicycle again. She couldn't run. She couldn't take PE in school. She couldn't do anything that would cause her to bump her head or jiggle things around in her head. But she had home teachers for a couple months and then went back to high school. And she graduated from high school, 8th in her class of over 500. And they had her speak at the seminary graduation down at the Assembly Hall on Temple Square. And she did a really good job. And then the next fall, she went down to Brigham Young University and lived with Michelle Calvin and Mary Ann Callister, who lived in our ward. And they had been friends of hers all along. And she had a really good year down there and enjoyed it, but she couldn't take the PE and she had to take less hours. And so she did lose the scholarship because she couldn't keep up with the number of hours and she couldn't take some of the required classes. But Cindy went to Brigham Young University for a couple years and she met Larry Todd, and she and Larry fell in love and got married in the Salt Lake Temple. And at first they rented a house, the basement over at Case's, and then they moved into an apartment at Elison's, and then they bought a house up in Sandy. Am I still there?
No, you're yeah. No, I can.
And lived there for several years until Larry took his own life. That was really rough for Cindy, and she moved back home. And she was starting to get a little bit shorter memory at that time. But after Larry died, why, things became much rougher for her. Burton and I went on a mission in 1992 and came home in May of 93. And by about August and September, the company that she was working for, Comp Health, decided that she had had a seizure and called for Larry, and her short-term memory was getting so that they would give her a job to do. She had gone from being an executive secretary down to the mailroom and the copy center, and they determined that it was no longer feasible for them to keep her on, but they were really, really good about it. They waited until Bert and I were home from our mission, and then they made all the appointments and did all of the things to see that Cindy saw a psychiatrist and the doctors, and that she went immediately on to Social Security. So they were really very good about it. But since then, Cindy has kind of gone downhill, and it wasn't really fast. It was gradual. But after she stopped working, she had to give up her driver's license, and that was, kind of a shock for her. And her short-term memory has become very evident. And at this point, she's having a difficult time keeping her balance and walking, and she has seizures still. We've been to a number of doctors, but they haven't ever been able to find something that would keep her from having seizures.
She's in a chair.
Well, we try to keep her in a transport chair so that she won't fall, because she's broken her wrist, she's broken her foot, she's broken her ribs, she's cut herself. I mean, we have been to the emergency with her so many times. But she likes to do puzzles and word things, but as time has gone on, she does less and less of productive type things. But she is at home right now with Donna taking care of her. Someone has to be with her all the time. And I'm hoping she's having a good time at home while we are on this fabulous vacation. I have to pinch myself. Tomorrow's my birthday, and I am here on my birthday. We love Cindy and wish that her life could be a happier one and a more productive one. But I guess this is God's plan for her, and there's nothing we can do about it except love her and help her. That's the end.